My name is Cole and it was Thanksgiving break. I had gone back home to visit my family. I really enjoy going back home as it gives me a break from the big city and college. The day came for me to leave. My plan was to head back early, but I lost track of time. It was about 6 o'clock and it was starting to get dark out. My mom insisted I stay another night, but I told her it was best I get going. I would really regret not staying another night. I was about an hour into my drive when I noticed a pair of headlights approaching in my rearview mirror. I hadn't seen any other cars since I left my parents' house, but I didn't think much of it. The headlights kept getting closer and closer until they disappeared right behind my car. This car was so close to my bumper that I couldn't see the headlights anymore. I looked at the rearview mirror and could see it was two guys, roughly in their late 20s to early 30s, kind of dirty looking. They started to honk at me and rev their engine. I wanted to let them pass, but I couldn't find anywhere for me to pull over. These guys really started getting on my nerves, so I decided to teach them a lesson by brake checking them. Big mistake. I heard their engine roar as they swerved into the other lane. They pulled up beside me. These guys looked dangerous, and I could tell they were on something. The driver kept pointing to the side of the road for me to pull over as the guy in the passenger seat smiled at me with this disgusting yellow grin. He looked at me and ran his thumb along his neck. I tried to speed off, but they kept driving beside me. I was terrified at this point for my safety. These guys were willing to risk their lives in order to teach me a lesson. Eventually, they swerved in front of me, nearly hitting my car. They brake checked me, almost causing me to rear end their car. I laid on the brake, and the car took off at full speed down the road. I sat still in my seat until I saw the red glow from their rear lights disappear. After a few minutes, I felt confident enough to continue to drive. About 5 miles up the road, I saw a car pulled off to the side. I quickly recognized it to be the same car from earlier. I decided in the off chance they pulled over to take a whiz, I'd floor it and speed past their car. As I was driving past their car, I saw someone step out from in front of the car and throw a massive rock onto my windshield, causing it to shatter. I lost control of my car and crashed into a tree. A few moments later, I woke up to glass shattered everywhere. My airbag was deployed and I couldn't feel or move my right arm. I could feel blood run down my face. I looked up and saw the massive redwood tree I crashed into. I was in such a daze that I had forgotten all about the car, the two creeps, and the fact they had thrown a massive rock against my windshield. I was scared out of my mind. Just then, I heard a tap coming from my window. In my head, I was expecting the worst. I was met with the face of the guy sitting in the passenger seat. His face was even more messed up close. He flipped me off and stuck a note onto my window. These idiots drove off. I was too weak to try to escape from my car, and I had no energy to try to find my phone. I laid my head on the steering wheel and dozed off. I remember waking up in a hospital bed. My mom was holding my left hand, and my dad was standing beside her. To my right, I saw a police officer standing there. I asked my parents what had happened, and they told me I had been in a terrible car accident. The police officer excused himself to give my parents and I privacy, but before he left, he handed me a note. It was the note the tweaker left on my window. I opened the folded paper. I could still see his face in my mind. The note read, "Next time, pull the F over." My wife and I have been married for 8 years, and we decided to get away for our anniversary. We both decided it would be a good idea to stay at the cabin we had stayed at during our first getaway as a couple. We booked the cabin and began our trip. This cabin is secluded and surrounded by nature. It's the perfect place to unwind with your significant other. Only downside, you don't get any cell reception for hours, so pre-planning is necessary. I had forgotten to put the address in the GPS. By the time I realized I had forgotten to start the GPS, we didn't have any reception. Understandably, my wife was very upset with me. I kept taking random turns, getting us more and more lost. I was too stubborn to admit it, but I had no idea what I was doing. After driving around for 2 hours, my wife grabbed my arm painfully tight and pointed up ahead. There was something lying on the side of the road. As we approached, the sight made my wife shriek in terror. It was a young woman. My wife insisted we pull over and check on her, but I told her it was best we pull up beside her and stay in the safety of our car. We pulled up to a grim scene. The woman was badly beaten, covered in bruises. I thought the woman was dead until she looked over at us, shivering and sobbing in silence. My wife rolled down the window, and the woman shakily raised her hand and pressed a finger up to her lips, signaling for us to be quiet. I hear rustling a few feet away. My wife jumped and screamed when she saw a man half hiding behind a tree. I looked over as well and jumped at the sight. It looked like he wasn't trying to hide. Just then, I heard rapid footsteps approaching from my wife's side of the car. As she began to roll up her window, a man forced his arms into our side passenger window, trying to grab onto my wife's hair. I put the full force of my foot onto the gas pedal and sped out of there. The man pulled on my wife's hair forcefully, but lost his footing as I sped off. In the rearview mirror, I could see the man standing in the middle of the road. The red glow from the rear lights made the man look so menacing. We were both very shaken up, but we knew stopping would be a terrible idea. About 30 minutes later, we got reception again on our phones, and we were able to use GPS. We made it to our destination, and that night we laid awake, unable to sleep. My wife turned over to me and asked me what the man looked like. I told her I couldn't really see him. I could only see his silhouette. She told me there must have been two men, because she could still see the other man standing behind the tree as we drove away. She started to cry and asked me if it was a mistake that we didn't help the woman. I told her she was probably in on whatever grim plan those men had for us. 3 months later, my wife and I were out grocery shopping. On our way out, we saw a bulletin board full of pictures. These were pictures of missing people. Amongst them, we saw the familiar face of the young woman we had seen lying on the side of the road that fearful night. We learned that her name was Cassandra, and she lived 3 towns over. She was only 18 years old and had been missing for exactly 3 months. I've been dealing with a lot recently. It's gotten so bad I've considered ending it all. Recently, the divorce to my wife of 10 years was finalized. To make matters worse, I lost my job due to lack of performance, and therefore lost my house. I was soon to lose my car, and the court decided it was best I lose custody of my daughter unless I can prove I was mentally stable. In my opinion, life wasn't worth living anymore. It was around 8 p.m. on Wednesday in mid-December. It was dark out and freezing. I decided to go on a drive to try to clear my mind. Driving aimlessly helped. I got to a national park my ex and I would frequent for hikes. I pulled into the parking lot and figured this would be the best place to end it all. I grabbed the gun from the glove box, opened the door to my car, and stepped out. I was sobbing, feeling like a complete failure. I aimed the gun up to my head. Just before I pulled the trigger, I heard a twig snap behind me. I pointed the gun down and looked behind me. I didn't see anything. I turned back around and put the gun up to my head again when I heard a low gargling sound. It startled me. I turned around, but again I didn't see anything. Right before I turned around again, I heard a roar and looked over to my left and witnessed the most horrific sight I had ever seen. Only a few feet ahead of me was this thing. It stood around 6 feet tall, pale and veiny. Its limbs and appendages were exaggeratedly long. It stared at me with bright, hungry eyes. It growled at me again, revealing its razor-sharp teeth. The way I could describe this thing was half human, half wolf. Its hunched-over body was turned to face me. I aimed my gun at the thing and shot twice at it, hitting it once. I made the mistake of only loading my gun with 2 bullets. I figured I wouldn't need any more to finish the original deed. The bullet was enough to slow the thing down, and it gave me enough time to run away. I could hear the thing gaining on me. It didn't sound like it was walking on all fours. I could hear footsteps, like heavy human footsteps. I looked back and saw the thing was standing there, looking at me. It was lean and big, hungry, but injured. I kept on running until I circled back to my car. I turned on my car, and the headlights revealed the thing standing 100 feet in front of me. I did a 3-point turn, and I could see the thing running full speed towards me. I sped away, and luckily I lost it. I got home and thought about how lucky I was to be alive. Completely opposite of how I felt earlier. All I could think about was my daughter, and how she needed me. The next day, I did some research and found out the thing that was stalking me was a skinwalker, and they're defined as a type of harmful witch who has the ability to transform itself into any animal.